So after finishing the recording you're about to watch, I realized that in the video you just saw, I mentioned that you might want to experiment with some of the models or the fields in the model here specifically. Now, I definitely encourage you to do that, but you might have ran into some issues when you ran python manage.py syncdb. So if you did this after you added some fields and you don't see those tables being created, and then maybe you go in the admin and you see some more errors, and all these errors started to happen. Well, there's a simple fix to it. All you have to do is delete the SQLite database, so SQLite or ITE3. Just delete that database completely, and then run syncdb again. It's going to ask you to do a super user, sign up as super user again, and then all of your fields that are new would actually work, assuming that you wrote them out correctly. Now, if you didn't do any of that stuff, or you didn't experiment at all, that's okay. It's good that you know what I just talked about, because we will come back to actually changing these models in the future. But this one, we're actually talking about a lot of forms. So without further ado, let's actually get started. All right, so in that last one, we actually set up the ability to store data in the database using just the admin, right? So now I could just come in here and add a ton of emails if I want and save it. And it actually, if I log out and then log back in, it'll actually be there when it come back. And it's stored in the SQLite database, which is really nice because all this stuff was fairly painless to do, but it's still storing all this data. And but what we want to do is not do it through the admin. We want it to be on a web form like this. So when they enter their email and hit join, it actually adds them into the database right here. So that's what we'll do in this one. We're gonna take a couple different approaches on how to do so you can kind of see that there's a few different ways you can use forms. So the first way I'm going to do is I'm going to use just a standard kind of form. It's not going to inherit from anything, so let's actually go into our joins app and we're going to make a new file in here. I'm going to save it right away as forms.py. All right, and save it. And then from Django, import forms. And I'll just call this class. We'll do it email form. And it's going to be forms.form. And it'll just be an email field. So all we're going to do is email equals to forms.email field. And that's it. So that's our form. And now let's actually check it out. So I just created a brand new form. This is not actually inheriting from anything. This is all by itself. So I don't actually have to have these models already set up in order for this to work. It's a form. It's an email form. It has nothing to do with our model at this point. We will make something that does later, but for now it doesn't have anything to do with it. So now that we have this written out, we can actually go into our views and add this form in. Because remember, our views handle how our end user sees everything. So in order for us to actually make the form seeable, if that's a word, you have to put it onto your view. So we'll do from .forms import email form. Right? So email form right here. That's what we just imported. So now I'll just do form equals to email form, and I'll just leave it empty. And then I have to add it into my context. We'll talk about context later, but form being form. All right, so the dictionary, the key is form, and then the value is this form right here, so form. Okay, so now that we have that, we can actually jump into home.html, and we can add our form in. So I'll just do form.as_p. So all that's doing is saying the form as a paragraph. So it renders it as HTML paragraph text. Okay, so now we can go to our home page, press enter, and look at that. We see a field here called email, and it's a form. And notice if I type in an email or a letter, it starts to add actual emails. That's because it's an email field. The browser already knows that it's the email field, so it's giving me autocomplete options, even though I'm not necessarily asking for it, which is cool. So now we actually need to make this form work. So this will bring us back into our HTML. All right, so to make a form work in HTML, you have to use the form tags. So the inputs for the form, so this is an input. The inputs for the form have to actually be rendered through like within the form tags. Okay, so then after that input, we need a button that allows us to submit it, which is a submit button. So input type equals to submit. And we can say value equals to join. And we can give it a class of, let's say, just btn. And this class is coming from Bootstrap. That's not like a standard thing. All right, so refresh. Now we have email and join. Cool. So if I hit enter on it, it doesn't do anything. In fact, it says up here, I noticed that that email came up. So if I remove it again, press email, still nothing's happened. Well, that's because we didn't do some stuff with it. We didn't give it a method, and then we didn't give it an action. Okay, so method and action, these are important concepts to understand. Action is where we're going to send the form, right? So if we had this, basically what view we're going to send it to, but the URL that corresponds to that view. So we could, in theory, use something like http://google.com, right? So we could, in theory, do that as our action, or we could do Swift for entrepreneurs and blah, blah, blah. I'll leave that out. But if we did it as Google, let's just see what happens. So if I refresh in here and click on join, it takes me to Google, and then it adds this attribute of email equals, and then all this other stuff is from Google itself, right? So that is being added through. So why is it doing that? Well, if we look into our form a little bit deeper, and I go to inspect element, sorry, it came off of the page, so all I did was in here, inspect element, I see that there's this name of email. So that's what inputs do. And the form that we have here on forms.py, Django is basically creating the field for us. It's creating all this stuff. It's creating the label, it's creating the input, and then it's giving us these paragraph text, the paragraph tags, because I did as P. So that's where that's coming from. And as we notice, we have this action going to Google. Well, let's actually add in another input so we can see how another input works. I'm just going to do input type equals to text, and I'll give it a name of name, or let's say first name, first underscore name. I'll just do that. First underscore name. Okay. So now if I go back in here and refresh, I now have this. I don't have a label for it because I didn't put it. But if I hit join now, it's going to take me to Google, and it shows me first name, and it also shows me email. Right? So just added these attributes into here. But what this is defaulting to is a GET request. GET request is very similar to like us going to a website. So if I click on this, in a way that's a GET request. You're going there and you're trying to get the information. That's typically what your requests are going to be, is trying to get this information. Now, we can change the method of these requests to something different. So if I left this as GET, and I did that again, so I just hit join, well, it sends the same stuff, right? If I changed the method to post, like send data, post it, like think of a mail, posting mail, or the post office. If I hit join now, it still goes and does the same thing. Well, that's part of the reason is because, sorry, it didn't actually do it. The request method post is not appropriate for this URL. Google already knows to handle this as an error, right? Where GET actually did work, but post did not, and as it should, right? So it should have done that. It should be doing this. But we don't want it to go to Google. That's crazy. We want it to go to one of our views. So how do we decide what the action is going to be? Well, the URL that corresponds to the action, so let's look for our URLs. I'm going to close that view and save it. This URL right here, wherever the form exists for this URL, is wherever the form exists on the view, that is where we want to send it. Okay, so if I had another view in here, and I called it, I'm just going to do it just to show you. I'll call it home 2, right? And home 2. So if I wanted the form to actually be saved on home 2 every time, but I wanted that form in a different place, such as home, then I can actually send it to that new view. But the only way to send it to that new view is by making a new URL for it. So I could copy this and call this home 2, and then adding a new URL here of home 2, right? So if I added that, now I could use the action of going to home 2. So let's actually go into our home.html. So now I could just do /home2 because this action is now relative to the site we're on, and it'll send it there. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to send it somewhere else. We can leave it blank because we want it to be on the view that we're actually rendering the form on. So it's going to be sent into itself. Now, if that sending to different URLs of the action, if that doesn't completely make sense, that's okay, because what we've got set up right here will work for us. Method is post, so we're sending data, and the action is going to go on the same page that it's rendering the form, which is what we want, and so we can now see it. So now I can post data in, and I have this input text of type, which name. So I'll just call this actually email2 now, and I'll leave it as is. So where we're at now is I have a method of post. It's going to send on to this view right here, and then we can do something with this data. So let's actually try that. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to put codingforentrepreneurs@gmail.com twice. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in there, hit join. Now I got a CSRF token error. Now, remember that error that we saw when we tried to send it to Google? Well, this is something very similar. It's not allowing us to do it because of cross-site request forgery. So spammers got really smart at these posts. They realized, hey, if you have a form on your site, if you have something like this on your site, I can spam you, and I can look for the name of it. If it says email, I'm definitely going to send you some fake emails and just spam your service. And maybe do some other things to it too that are harmful. So Django has a way to prevent that from happening. And to do that, we just do CSRF token to actually allow this to run through. So if I refresh now, it might have to actually reboot the whole thing. So if I hit join now, it doesn't run that same error because of this token. However, this input right here, it might run into some errors on our own too, because this is hard-coded input, right? Versus the form that we had here, where I actually wrote out the input here. So the method that you should be using is form, if you're going to be using just a raw form that's not inheriting from something. So let's actually go back into home, and we get rid of this. All right, I'll leave this in for now, and we'll see how to actually pull this data, just so you know, but we do not want to have this later. We want to use the forms.py or the Django built-in forms to handle our form data. So now that we have this, we can go to our views, and we need to see our methods. So I'll do print request. Okay, so we want to see what the request actually is. So I'm going to refresh, hit continue, and in our terminal, we will see this big old thing for request. So what I see now is if I scroll down here, I see this get, so that's a get request. There's nothing in it, and easy to signify because there's nothing up here. And also we didn't use a get request in our form. And then post has email2 as well as email. Hey, look at that. And then also a CSRF middleware token, so the token that actually came through to allow the form to actually be passed. All right, so now we have our email2. Well, this is cool. So this means I can actually grab this data. So now let's do request.post. And if I refresh in here, sending the post data, because if you actually just navigate to it, it's going to say, it might run an error saying that it needs post data or no post data is found. Okay, so yeah, that's good. So it's still printing out empty query dictionary every time we go on it because there's no post data. Now if I add some, so codingforentrepreneurs@gmail, hit join, and now I look at my terminal, I now see I got email2 being empty, email being codingforentrepreneurs@gmail. Cool, so that's the basics of the form. So what we can do from here is we can actually request post any of these dictionaries. So email or email2. So email, and I'll just hit comma, and then I'll do email2. Okay, so go back in here. I'm going to confirm form resubmission. Email, so I have a dictionary value error here. So if I scroll up, I see email2 is actually _2, where I looked for email just 2, no underscore. So let's actually add that underscore in there. And refresh one more time, send it one more time, went through, and we see codingforentrepreneurs@gmail.com. So I could say, hi, codingforentrepreneurs@gmail.com, join, print it out. It says those two things. All right, so that's actually pulling the data. But it's not using the Django form. It's actually using just raw HTML form. So that's where this is actually starting to make a little bit more sense to us. So let's actually comment this out, and we'll do request.post or none. Okay, so let's see what that does. Now, if I go in here and I hit if I just hit C and then A, hit join, it now runs this error. Okay, cool. So if I now do it, hit join, it worked. Now, what if I submitted the form without hitting anything? It's going to say this field is required. So this is now validating whether or not this data is correct. It's running validation for us, where before it wasn't, especially doing request post. That is not doing it. So doing email form request post or none, this is passing in this value. So if we just did request post with no or none, and we navigate to this page, right away, let's see, make sure our server's running. Right away, we're going to run errors right away, and that's because we're trying to request post data when no post data is actually coming through, so that's why you say or none. All right, cool. So now that works. So now, how do we actually get this form data? So we can say if form.isValid. So if the form's valid, because this is validating it, this is checking whether or not this is a real email, basically. Print form.cleaned data and email. So I refresh in here, Coding for Entrepreneurs, hit join, and we've got that email. Cool. So now we're actually collecting the email address. We actually just collected it. And that old form or that old input that we have, we don't want that anymore, so let's actually just get rid of it. If you want more inputs, so if you wanted to have name, you could do forms.charfield. And now let's look at it. Oops. And there we go. So now we have name and email. Hit enter. It says fields. Both fields are required. So if I just hit required equals to false, now that goes away. Okay, so that requirement is no longer there. And you could do that on the email field as well if you are so inclined. Now I'm going to leave off name at the end of the day once we're all done, but for now we have it. We have name and email. Cool. So how do we actually save this data? How do we save it to our database? Now this is the part that I think is so exciting, especially if you've never coded before, is saving data. Like, it's crazy, because before I knew how to do this, it was like, how do you do it? It's ridiculous. It has to be really hard. And granted, I'm taking a while to explain it, but it's really pretty straightforward. So if I do from.models, import join, so join, which is this, what we're going to do in our view is I'm going to do new join and created equals to join.objects.get or create email equals to email. Sorry, not email equals to email, because we need to set this equal to email. So email equals to that. So now it could be email equals to email. So what's going on here? We're getting the join model, right? So the model over here. It's going for all the objects that are in there. It's going to either get the object that is related to this email, right? That's coming through. Sorry, let's go in here. So it's going to get the objects, any one object that's related to this email, or it's going to create it, right? And that's going to return a tuple. So two values. It's going to return two values in what's called a tuple. And I put one as the object or the instance itself, and then one as created. So I'll just print new join and created so you can see what that looks like. And then I will print new join dot timestamp so we can see that too. All right, so now let's go back in here. Let's actually add in an email, and I'll hit join. Nothing seemed to have happened, but let's actually look at our terminal. We see codingforentrepreneurs@gmail. So that's the instance. It does say the email, but that's the Unicode right there. And then it says true. So created, that means it was actually created. It did not get it. It was actually true. And then it gives us a timestamp as to when it was created, which just happened. So let's run that one more time so we can see what get looks like. If I hit join again, go into terminal, now I see that instance again, and it says false. So this time, it was not created. So if we actually had something created, we could say if created, so if that's true, print this object was created. Okay, so now let's do a different email. I'll do Coding for Entrepreneurs 4, hit join, and if we look in our terminal, we see the email, Coding for Entrepreneurs 4, true, the timestamp, and then it says this object was created. If I hit join again, this object was created is gone. All right, so that's how we can actually store data using just a general form. But there's actually an easier way to do it, and that is using a model form. So what we'll do now is do class join form, and it's forms.modelForm, and we'll do class meta model equals to, well, we have to import the model because we're going to use it, so the join model into forms. So from dot models import join. So now we have this join form. We just set the model there. Okay. And then in our view, if we want to use that form now, we just import it. So join form. And we change this form. I'll leave all this stuff so you guys can see it later. But I'm going to comment it out for now. And I'll put a comment, put a comment above it saying this is using regular Django forms. And then this is using model forms. Okay, so join form is now what it is. So we'll do form equals to join form request post or none. It's the same thing. All right, so let's actually look at this form. Let's go back into into Chrome. If we hit enter, we see emails coming through. So what's that telling us? Forms.py, look at how much easier it was to write our model form now because it's actually based off of this model. So if we had other fields in here, so if you actually did some experimenting and added in a new field, you would be able to actually have the model form coming through, which is cool. So that's actually showing you all the fields that go related to that model. So now back in our view, saving it is fairly straightforward. If form.isValid, we'll say new join equals to form.save, commit equals to false, and then we'll just say new join.save. All right, so what's happening here? New join, I'm setting it equal the instance that's coming through, or what's being saved, what the form is getting. I'm saying don't save it yet because we might do something here. And then after we do that something, then we'll save it. All right, so this is virtually the same thing. So if I come in here, I do codingforentrepreneurs@gmail.com, hit join. Well, if I hit it a couple times, let's actually look into our admin. And, oh, I have an error. I have to get rid of this one right here. So I knew that that was coming through because it's saying it could not import joins.view.home. View doesn't exist, and that was clearly a URL issue, so save it. Okay, so now we got joins. Go back in here. Now I have all these codingforentrepreneurs@gmail.com. So this is one of possibly the downsides to how we just did it, which we just basically grabbed the data, and we might, when I said we might do something here, well, we are going to do something here. And that is going to be something very similar to this right here. So what we'll do is we're actually going to copy these, put these down here, and new join old. So I can actually use that exact same thing, right? So this will actually give me one instance of the object, right? So this is only going to create one email in the sense that we don't want multiple here. We just might want one. We want them to join one time. We don't need them to join 100 times. So this call right here, get or create, will have run some errors. So let's actually look at it. If I did codingforentrepreneurs@gmail, hit join, it says it returned 8. That's because we have 8 saved as codingforentrepreneurs@gmail, and that's what getter create is doing. So if I just hit filter and I run it again, we got some values, too many values to unpack, and that's this right here. So that it doesn't return tuple, it would return a just an item, one object, right? So I'm hitting it and it's actually filtering it out, but it's not actually doing anything. So let's put it back to getter create, and then we'll go into our admin joins, and then I'll delete everything except for 2 of them. Oops, go in here, delete these last 2, everything but those last 2. All right, so now if we come through again and we did codingforentrepreneurs@gmail, hit join, no errors go through. So when we're designing these things, we want to be careful about how we actually do it, right? So, but that model form is pretty cool for like a contact us page. We could do the exact same thing, but all we would do is just save the form right off the bat. But this is allowing us to just kind of do something else in here in between actually saving the form and not. But at least we have 2 ways now to actually collect data. We have it using a regular form, a regular Django form, and then we have it using a model form. Now there are ways to edit this stuff, each one, to do more things than what we've covered here, but this is the basics. Now we can grab data and we can save it, which is exactly what we want and what we need. So that's it for now on using forms. It's quite a big topic. So definitely if you're interested in this is something that would make it reason to actually jump into a full class that handles a lot more stuff when it regards to forms and how they can interact with other data and stuff like that. But since all we're concerned about in this class is to actually collect this email and then do something with that email, that this is where we're going to leave forms at this time. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, I added in some stuff here and I tried to do syncdb and it didn't work and all this stuff. If that's the case, we are actually going to cover that. So in the next one, we're going to actually talk about how to add new stuff in here without breaking the database, without getting some errors and stuff like that. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will see you in the next one.